much. Good afternoon and good evening to everyone. And welcome to this congressional briefing on Belarus's transition from dictatorship to democracy. This is being sponsored by the Central and East European Coalition, which is a coalition of national ethnic organizations representing about 20 million voters of Central and East European descent in the United States of America. My name is Michael Sawkiw. I will be your moderator for this afternoon's and this evening's discussion. For those who do not know me, I am the Executive Vice President of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, the representative organization of the Ukrainian American community, and also its director of its Public Affairs Office in Washington, D.C., under the name of the Ukrainian National Information Service, and I've been involved with the Central and East European Coalition for about 25 years. It is truly an honor to have a stellar group of individuals and experts with us this afternoon as we explore and examine the current state of affairs in Belarus since the fraudulent elections in August 9th of 2020, as well as to come up with some policy recommendations for U.S. foreign policy with Belarus, as well as with our other allies in Europe throughout the world, on how to deal with the current situation. It's a very stark situation. Our experts can give us a brief update as to what is going on, but the world has truly witnessed remarkable events that have transpired in Belarus since August of last year for the past 6 months. To begin this discussion, we were going to have Congresswoman Kaptur with us, but she's been delayed in votes. So I will move on to the introduction of our three panelists that we have with us today. First, we have Valery Kavaleuski. He is the representative of opposition leader Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya on foreign affairs matters. Valery was in the Belarusian Foreign Service. He also, previously to that, he worked at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and while in Washington, D.C., was the Belarusian American Association representative to the Central and East European Coalition. So it's an honor to see a good and great friend in Valery that's joining us right now. Jonathan Katz is also with us. He is the Director of Democracy Initiatives and a Senior Fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Prior to the German Marshall Fund, John was also a Deputy Assistant Administrator at USAID, where he oversaw projects in Central and East Europe. But prior to that, which I've known Jonathan since that time, he was the Staff Director for the European Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. For technical purposes as well, Jonathan has informed me that he has to leave a bit early before the 4 o'clock. So if you'll have any questions, please be mindful of Jonathan's time. If you have anything to ask, please try to ask it of him quickly. And last, we also have Vytis Jurkonis, who is the project director at Freedom House in the Vilnius office. He also lectures at the Institute of International Relations at Vilnius University. He is known as a leading expert on Belarusian related affairs, the Eastern Partnership, and also on Russia. For his efforts and work on behalf of the promotion of human rights, he did receive the Lithuanian Diplomacy Star from the Lithuanian government. So with that, I offer the first remarks to Valery. As I said earlier, it's a pleasure to see you, Valery. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity for being with us, and we'd love to hear your comments about the current situation and any prospects that you see on advancing U.S.-Belarusian relations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. And dear friends of Belarus, thank you for inviting me to speak about my country today. It is my honor to have the opportunity to highlight these most pressing aspects of the situation in Belarus and suggest the steps that the United States could take to make material difference in our country. I would like to thank Congresswoman Kaptur and her office, as well as Central and East European Coalition and Belarusian American Association for organizing this event. I would like to speak about three aspects of the situation, just to make an assessment of what's going on right now on the ground, to assess the international response to the developments in Belarus, and make suggestions about the practical steps that the United States and other countries could make to influence the situation. So speaking about the current situation in Belarus, contrary to the statements and the confidence that authorities in Belarus try to radiate at this point of time, the situation in the country remains unstable. Lukashenko, as a strongman, as he likes to portray himself, he cannot take the situation under his control. The protest continues. And in spite of many calls in Belarus and abroad, the authorities refuse to initiate any genuine dialogue with the society. Even in August, it was obvious that the regime has run out of ideas, it has run out of resources, it has run out of vision for the country. And this has actually fueled the protest all along. And by now, the only available instrument in the arsenal of Lukashenko is just brute violence, which is reinforced by the judiciary that is completely controlled by the state security apparatus. In response to the repressions, the protest has evolved and retreated to neighborhoods. It retreated to backyards, and finally, it has stopped at people's houses and apartments. The reduction in the protest activity has clearly resulted from persistent violence and excessive penalties in the forms of fines, arrests, and even criminal cases, just for people protesting, just expressing their political opinion. However, people continue to be willing to protest. The protest potential remains very, very high. As many times in their history, in response to this unmatched violence, Belarusians have essentially shifted to partisan tactics, as people continue to express their determination to reach the objective of bringing the change in Belarus. Today marks exactly 200 days after the elections, and the key features of the protest remain the same. No geopolitics, there are no slogans, no calls for pro-Western or pro-Russian integration, and likewise there are no sentiments anti-Russian or anti-Western, even though Russia has lost a lot in terms of its popularity among Belarusians. Other important aspects of the protest remain the solidarity among Belarusians, which has never been seen before, I would say. The protest remains non-violent, and what we can see now is a prominent role of women in the protest, which has been pronounced since the very beginning of the protest in Belarus. Still, the most important goal of the protest of all Belarusians is to have free and fair elections under international observation, when Belarusians will elect competent, responsible, and accountable government, which would be recognized by the international community. But above all, it would be recognized by Belarusians themselves. Important distinctive feature of the protest after the 2020 elections is that Belarusians have become the champions of the democratic change in their country. Before, in previous crises, the situation was somewhat different. If you remember 2010, that was a huge protest when there was a huge crackdown after the elections. And the protest was quite striking for that time, but the response was also strong from the authorities, and essentially in just a couple of weeks, the country kind of sank into depression and apathy, and it was impossible to just to bring people out on the street, and people were just going into a very depressed mood. But this time around, it's very different. While before it looked like it seemed that the West cared more about democracy in Belarus, now it seems that Belarusians drive the process, and they are the champions of the change in their own country. Speaking about the international response, initial reaction from the European Union, United States, United Kingdom, and Canada was rather principled, but mostly focused on political aspects. I would list a couple of them. First is the non-recognition of election results, and accordingly the refusal to recognize Lukashenko as a legitimate president. Second would be the condemnation of violence and demands to release political prisoners. Third was a very important step to invoke the OSCE Moscow mechanism, which produced a report confirming vast and flagrant violations literally of all rights: civil, political, social, cultural, economic rights. And finally, many states have recognized Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya as a legitimate leader of Belarus. Practical steps also followed, but they were quite cautious and very, very gradual. They included individual sanctions, visa restrictions, and in a rather limited way, targeted economic sanctions. And until now, the United States has not introduced any economic sanctions. However, if sanctions are meant to influence the behavior of such a rogue regime as Lukashenko has now, Western sanctions have stopped rather short of reaching this objective, as the violence and lawlessness continue until today. If anything, the repressions have gone deeper into the fabric of the society. The basic principle of Lukashenko: no one who was too brave to raise their head and stood against him will go unpunished. This principle stands as we speak now. So what practical steps I would suggest that would go sort of not just sanctions, but beyond sanctions? So turning first to the readily available instruments. These are the economic sanctions that were introduced after the 2010 elections. They were suspended after the Russian annexation of Crimea. Mm-hmm. And they were suspended in response to sort of the calls from the Belarusian authorities not to push Belarus too close to Russia. At the same time, this move from the West, very friendly move to Lukashenko, has not produced any tangible results, any systemic changes. Nothing has been done in Belarus to create any democratic space, to make any systemic changes in the legislation. So these economic sanctions right now, they remain under waiver, but they could be reintroduced rather fast and rather swiftly. And unfortunately, until today, they have not been, but the waiver to suspend the sanctions, it expires at the end of April, and we're hopeful that sanctions will be resumed after that. The other important instrument would be to establish an international investigative body, hopefully by the United Nations. Or if it doesn't happen, then the states who have invoked the Moscow mechanism could do it on their own. Delegating it to the NGO, this mechanism would mean less credibility and influence. And this is the third option, and it is probably more realistic in terms of implementation, but its effects would be much lesser than if established by the United Nations or by the states who invoked the mechanism. Speaking about the role of Russia, it is quite prominent, and it's not just prominent in helping Lukashenko to withstand the pressure from the protest, both internally and internationally, but Russia is also planning and doing steps to strengthen the control over Belarus, over the economy, over the political sphere, military sphere, security issues. So my goal is to deter Russia from using Lukashenko's weakness to strengthen its control over Belarus. It is important to send to the Kremlin a signal that any such attempts with an illegitimate ruler, be it signing closer integration agreements or buying Belarusian enterprises, etc., they will not be recognized as legally valid. The other aspect of Russian interference in Belarusian affairs is hybrid interference, which means disinformation and propaganda. The United States knows what it means to have interference of Russian government in such forms, and it's happening in Belarus, and Russia today's people have essentially replaced Belarusian TV presenters, and Russian TV and media, they essentially dominate in the information field in Belarus. At the same time, we want to keep the momentum in informing the world about the situation in Belarus. We want to consolidate the position of Belarus friends in the European Union, United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and other nations. And besides national governments, we think that the United States could help bring up the Belarusian case in the United Nations, especially in the United Nations Security Council. This situation in the country qualifies to be raised at the UNSC. It has already threatened international peace and security, and people who had to flee the country, they definitely could tell the story that this situation cannot stand any longer. And of course, the instruments within the OSCE, they should be used more effectively. We welcome the mediation efforts by the United States, by other countries, and we also would welcome the participation of Russia in the mediation efforts under the OSCE auspices. At the same time, we haven't seen much progress in implementing, in employing these instruments in practice. Speaking about the importance of keeping Belarusian issue high on the agenda in the international affairs, it would be important to have Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya visit the United States and to have meetings at the highest political level possible. Of course, once the coronavirus measures are eased, and it would be possible to meet with the leadership of the country. Speaking about a very practical measure that would help bring up the Belarusian issue on the international agenda would be to establish the Belarusian service at Voice of America in Washington, D.C. That would become essentially a Belarusian house in Washington. At the moment, the embassy of Belarus in D.C. does not represent the people of Belarus. It represents the regime of Lukashenko, and it does not speak the voice of Belarusians. It does not cover the issue for Belarus. So it would be important to, it's a high time actually to finally resolve this and have Belarusian service at Voice of America. It hasn't been done for a number of decades because many relied on Russian service as sort of representative of Belarusians. But the events in Belarus have shown that Belarus is a country of its own, and it cares about its identity, it's about culture and about language. Above all, with all the measures that could be implemented, could be introduced, with all the concerted efforts from all corners of the world, it is crucial to stay consistent in implementing the policy on Belarus. The regime diplomacy will try to create tiny cracks in the consolidated position of democratic states, to expand them, to create space for themselves, and to convince that Lukashenko is normal again. We've seen this after the 2010 elections, when the Western governments reacted rather swiftly to the situation. They introduced the sanctions, but then the sanctions were removed because of geopolitical considerations. However, no systemic changes were done in Belarus inside, and we saw the implications, the consequences of this lax leverage on Belarus in August 2020, when the whole repressive machine crashed on Belarusians. So in closing, I would like to say the following. It should be clear to everyone that Lukashenko right now is out there to destroy the drive of Belarusians for democratic change. He is not just suppressing the protest, he wants to destroy it altogether. This is the alternative to democratic change Belarusians are seeking so courageously and with so much determination. We cannot let this happen, and the United States is in the best position to unite the efforts of democratic nations to support Belarusians in their pursuit of freedom. I thank you for your attention, and I will be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Valery, I think I speak for everybody who is listening, and as well as the panelists, that your description of the current events as you see it now, on behalf of the Belarusian people, we are with you in your struggle and in your fight against this dictator, against this authoritarian leader. And I'm sure that there will be questions for you after the panelists have their opportunity. I do notice that Congresswoman Kaptur has joined us. Congresswoman, are you with us?
I am here.
Hi, Congresswoman, how are you? Pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your leadership role on behalf of Belarus and so many other places where liberty is so at risk.
Well, we thank you, Congresswoman. This is truly an honor to have you as one of our featured speakers for these remarks. We know that you are the co-chair of the Congressional Ukrainian Caucus, the co-chair of the Congressional Hungarian Caucus, You have been a staunch advocate and supporter of strong U.S. foreign policy in the Central and East European region. In last year's Congress, in the 116th Congress, you were the champion for the Belarus Democracy, Human Rights, and Sovereignty Act of 2020. And one of the great feats of last Congress as well is that you were the lead sponsor for the 3 Cs initiatives resolution. So it truly is an honor to have you with us. We have you as a friend, I think, within Congress, and we look for your leadership and your stewardship to guide us through in terms of forming a better foreign policy for U.S. and Belarus. So we ask for your remarks, and Congresswoman, if you don't mind, if there could be a question or two after your remarks. I know that you have a very busy schedule, and then we'll move on to the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm sorry to be late. We were interrupted by votes, and I had to usually have to walk about a half mile between where our offices are and where we vote. So I was a little bit occupied with that. But I want to thank you.
Thank you
for your enduring leadership, and all those you've invited today, Carl Alto and others from Central and East European Coalition for organizing this very, very timely briefing. I see such experts and diplomats on the line. I'm very humbled to be with you. And I want to thank Nicholas Kazmini-Gore of our own staff, who really helps me so much on these matters and shares your passion. Your leadership is truly appreciated here on Capitol Hill, and all of your support for our 3 Cs resolution, which is making progress, and so much more. Thank you for giving lift to Belarus. Thank you. I remain deeply concerned with the situation in Belarus in the face of the brutal oppression that has impacted the democracy movements there since the illegitimate elections of August 9th. And despite all odds, peaceful protesters in Belarus have answered liberty's call and bravely protested these injustices, even in the bitter cold. They faced down, as you well know, gross and horrific human rights violations at the hands of Alexander Lukashenko's thugs, including arbitrary detention, torture, sexual violence, rape, and excessive force. According to Belarusian civil society, over 30,000 people have been detained, 30,000, and 8 have been killed. I've been especially inspired by the leading role that women have played in peaceful demonstrations across the country, and this includes visionary leadership of Belarusian Democratic leader Sviatlana, if I'm saying it properly, Tsikhanouskaya, and Maria Kalesnikova, and so many others. It truly shows how critical women are to defend democracy at liberty's edge, and I want to personally condemn the Lukashenko regime and their crackdown on his own people. Instead of heeding calls for liberty, he has turned to Russian dictator Vladimir Putin for loan guarantees and for support from Russian propagandists and their secret service and their security services, and we know what that means. Just this week, for the second time, Lukashenko groveled before Putin with his hat in hand. So the United States Congress, and I want to assure you that we strongly support the aspirations of the Belarusian people to choose their own future on the political system that they create and govern. And I was pleased to see the largest transatlantic letter in recent history, with fellow legislative colleagues from 29 countries condemning the violence against the Belarusian people. That message was heard loud and clear, and I've also been impressed with the newly confirmed U.S. ambassador to Belarus, Julie Fisher. Mm-hmm. I know she'll just do a great job as a career diplomat. She has the depth of experience to coordinate with civil society to fight for a more democratic Belarus. And I'm also encouraged by her openness to work with those of us here in Congress, because I really have experienced and know that the leadership, the continuing leadership for liberty for all people in Central Europe has been led by the House of Representatives. And we appreciate our senators' support, but I know where the drive is coming from, and in our form of government, it's very important. So we are very honored that we have a bipartisan Belarus Democracy Act that has been authored, and to surge funding to Belarusian civil society, and importantly, as part of the legislation, to expand sanctions authority to include Russians who are complicit in human rights violations. As a senior member of what we call our Appropriations Committee, where we fund the various agencies of the government, I'm just very honored to have played a leading role in ensuring this legislation became law through the Fiscal Act of 21 appropriations in just a matter of months. So with the passage of the Belarusian Democracy Act, I am committed to ensuring that our U.S. Agency for International Development and our State Department, under the leadership of Tony Blinken, now with Wendy Sherman as the Deputy Secretary, will surge funding to Belarusian nascent civil society so that available funding can be deployed swiftly and effectively. These are very experienced leaders in our country who care very much about Belarus and about your part of the world. So we can't wait until we see the new president's budget, which should be coming up very shortly for fiscal year 22. But we took care of that here in the Congress and for this year. I am thankful to the Biden administration's support for Belarus, but we must also now take a principled stand evidenced by our interactions with the protest movements themselves. And we must significantly increase funding for Belarusian democracy and support for Radio Free Europe in this upcoming budget. And I'm currently working on a bipartisan basis to make that a reality. And finally, we have to cooperate more robustly with our European, Canadian, and British counterparts to keep up the pressure on the regime in Minsk. We cannot return to normal. We have to expand our sanctions against malign actors in Belarus and those Russians who are complicit. And this includes members of Belarusian society, security services, and the Interior Ministry itself. We're always open to suggestions, and we look to Michael Sawkiw for leadership. And in conclusion, I look forward to this very important panel to learn about what more we can do to support the Belarusian people's desire to choose their own future free from interference. You have a right to be a sovereign, free nation. Thank you so very much.
Congresswoman, your words speak volumes to all of us who care about this particular issue. From Valery in Belarus to Vytis, who is in Lithuania, to Jonathan, myself, and my colleagues that are here in Washington, D.C., working with you and working with other members of Congress, I think that it is essential to move the needle as much as possible when it comes to Belarus. I don't know if you were able to hear Valery's description of the situation in Belarus and that what is needed in terms of leadership coming from the West, in particular from the United States, to get that democracy movement stable and moving forward within Belarus. I would like to note for everyone that the Congresswoman, along with Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, are co-sponsoring a resolution on Belarus. I think hopefully tomorrow, Congresswoman, if I understand correctly, that resolution will come up for a markup on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So we thank you for continuing your efforts on behalf of this very vital cause for democracy in Central and East Europe. Congresswoman, I have one particular question, if you allow me. Sanctions, obviously, within the BDA is very, very important to move forward against all those malign actors that you had mentioned and Eddie even mentioned. But given even a few days ago, there was a discussion raised at the White House briefing and also a State Department briefing session on a related topic, not unrelated to Belarus, but about Nord Stream and talking about sanctions from Nord Stream. And both spokespeople had responded to say that there are other options than sanctions. Are there other options as well that we potentially could have for the situation in Belarus? And if I may possibly even mention a particular option, much like Ukraine had a special envoy for several years dealing with the situation in Eastern Ukraine, would the notion of a special envoy to Belarus be an option at this particular time?
Sorry. Very interesting suggestion. I'm not aware. I have gotten some rumors as to what was actually said at that White House meeting. found it a little troubling. But I haven't had a chance today to really follow up to learn what exactly happened, Michael. But I think I am fully convinced that President Joe Biden doesn't need any education on what needs to be done in Central Europe. He has an utter dedication to the strengthening of the transatlantic alliance and to the accession of nations like Belarus, Ukraine, to the European Union. So that is my goal as well.
Great.
So I'm very open to suggestions. I would not want to see an envoy replace sanctions. And I don't view it as an either or. Maybe it's a both and. And if we receive a request from an interested group of individuals or organizations, we will certainly move that along and make the suggestion. But I don't think we should use it as a replacement for sanctions.
Agreed. Absolutely. My colleagues at the Central East European Coalition, in the background, have there been any questions to the Congresswoman in the Q&A?
So, Michael, there are no specific questions for Representative Kaptur at this point, and general questions. You've answered actually one of the questions about special envoy that was asked.
Oh, okay. Congresswoman, I know that you have a very busy schedule, so we thank you.
Could I ask one question?
Please.
My question is, from an energy standpoint, who can tell me what would be the most important set of actions that the West could take to help Belarus, if any?
Valery, I think you would be the best to answer, yes?
Well, I'm not sure I will be the best one, but I will do my best. So until recently, until August 2020, the United States has started to supply American oil to Belarus, which was a breakthrough moment in essentially monopoly of Russia in supplying energy resources to Belarus. That has been suspended after the August 2020 crackdown. And before that, it was mostly a political act by Lukashenko regime, sort of to engage with the United States deeper as much as possible, sort of to influence the administration to remove the sanctions altogether. So it was not kind of driven by economic considerations, but mostly driven by the political considerations. But nevertheless, many people who monitored the situation, this development, they were actually encouraged that Belarus would buy American oil, and be it American oil or from any other suppliers other than Russia. Unfortunately, it had to stop, and that decision was principled by the suppliers themselves. They said, like, we cannot deal with Belarus any longer in these circumstances. But at the same time, it's really important to consider for the future action when the change happens in Belarus, that Belarus diversifies its suppliers of energy. And there are many excellent suppliers other than Russia, and they're more transparent, they're more effective, and the relations with these suppliers does not imply sort of giving in your independence and sovereignty, which has been the case with Russia for quite some time. The other aspect, and I think that our neighbors, immediate neighbors, are very much concerned about this, is this Belarusian nuclear power plant, which has been built on the border with Lithuania. It was constructed by using Russian money, essentially without any consideration of public opinion in Belarus. In fact, that public opinion was heavily suppressed for quite some time for people who were not able to speak up their minds against this. And the problem with this is that Belarus has been affected by the Chernobyl disaster more than any other country in the world. So Belarusians you would think that Belarusians would have kind of upper hand in deciding, like, should we have nuclear energy on our territory or not? And they were said, like, no, you don't have this voice. So we had to borrow the money. from Russia. We now import nuclear material for the nuclear power plant. It was constructed according to the Russian technology, and there were many concerns that this technology is good enough, is modern enough, and the construction itself was done properly. So I think that we should be also thinking how to resolve this issue in the future with this troubled nuclear power plant, which has plunged Belarus into more dependence on energy to Russia, financial indebtedness with Russia, technological, we now depend on Russia to absorb back the processed nuclear material. And so this idea, this design, this project has brought a variety of problems for Belarus, and I think that we should think in advance how to resolve this. And I think that Vytis Jurkonis knows the subject really well. Being born and raised in Vilnius and being a patriot of his country, he can say a lot about this. Sorry if it was too long.
Thank you, Valery. I'm sorry to move it along a little bit further, but I know that Jonathan has to leave in several minutes, and we would definitely like to hear his remarks. So Vytis, if you can hold on a few minutes, actually, maybe to answer the Congresswoman's question. But Jonathan, please, before.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add for the Congresswoman too that the U.S. has a track record of supporting countries in Eastern Europe, reduce dependency, on Russia, and I think what we've done in spaces like Ukraine and Moldova with support of the EU and the EU energy community would be a natural space to move into if the right leadership is in Minsk to do this. Of course, this is what ties Lukashenko to Moscow, this issue in particular, and I think if we're looking ahead, and I know you and your staff, your good staff, Nick, and others are looking at what areas might be the U.S. can work with a government that is representative of the people, and energy is clearly one of them because it's critical for the economy. But there is experience in the U.S. working across Eastern Europe and Central Europe and helping to transition governments. So I just wanted to put that out there, and it's something that we should be thinking about ahead of time rather than wait until things change to help put things in motion.
Jonathan, please continue with your remarks.
Well, I just want to thank you. I know we have limited time, and Vytis, and I just want to thank the Congresswoman because I think that the role of Congress has just been critical to support for Belarus. A year ago, right now, Secretary Pompeo last February was in Minsk, meeting with Mr. Lukashenko, and it looked like Belarus was going to continue down the path that it has been going. And of course, things changed dramatically. And so, I'm here today on behalf of the German Marshall Fund of the United States. And GMF has a program called the Fund for Belarus Democracy. Vytis and others know this program right now, which is run out of our Berlin office. But we're just pleased to be here with this group, the diaspora community from Central and Eastern Europe, and just thank them because I've worked with many of them when I was on the Hill as well as a staffer, working directly with these communities and how important it is, including now with the Belarusian American community, to have that support and engagement and leadership. And so it's really been critical. And I just wanted to add my voice to that continued work, and also the work that's been done by Congress. I just quickly wanted to say that looking at the administration right now, and I think I don't think I need to add on top of the challenges on the ground, because I think Valery and Vytis can speak to the unconscionable situation that's taking place. And I think it was said, maybe by you, Michael, too, that the situation has grown much more grave. The repression has increased. And when you see the meeting, most recent meeting between Putin and Lukashenko, where they're at the time that you have Belarusians in jail being tortured, and you see the two of them sort of riding around, skiing, playing hockey, and you see the role that Russia plays internally, what the situation has become and can become even going forward. So basically what I think wanted to talk about really was that I think there's an opportunity, obviously building on the work that's been done by Congress. There's a new administration in place that I think, as the Congresswoman pointed out, I think you're looking very carefully at policy in this region. I'm sure everybody reread or watched the Munich security speech of President Biden. I think it was very clear how he views Russia in the context of foreign policy. And I think his mention of Ukraine and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is critical. He also said that he wants to ensure that countries are able to make their own decisions, and the people of those countries able to make their own decisions about their future. And I think that to me is really essential. Obviously, Ambassador Julie Fisher's in place. Key interlocutors, Secretary of State Blinken is in place right now. Wendy Sherman, others. And I think what you're going to see, I hope, over the next several weeks, particularly in the lead up to the fiscal year 22 budget, in which the administration, I think, will have an opportunity to help articulate the policy even further towards Belarus, is an increased level of support, assistance. I am struck too that I think one of the things that I want to make sure that we debunk in these conversations is somehow this is anything but about Belarusians seeking their own future and their own democratic future, peaceful one, because there's a lot of disinformation that exists that I think needs to be debunked, which is somehow that this is an exercise of the United States or the West. This is all about Belarus. And I think this administration, partners like the UK, Canada, the EU, and others recognize this. And it makes it a unique situation in the sense that the support needs to come, but it needs to come in a smart way that helps support those that are facing challenges. As mentioned, those political prisoners that are still in place right now that need to be released. And I strongly urge that to remain a focus. But also, how do you move from a situation where you are now to actual political transition? And I think that component is the most difficult one. But we are in such a different place today with Belarus and Belarusian democratic aspirations than a year ago. And I still feel I need to say this, having worked on this issue, is particularly in Washington and elsewhere, that this is a real opportunity. And it is in US interest to see democracy take foot and hold in Belarus, and that Belarusians who are members of the Eurasian Economic Union that do have a relationship with Russia are still able to succeed. It is not an either or moment. So I have a lot more to add, but I know we have very limited time. I just hope that, one, I would encourage the passage of HRES 124, which the Congresswoman mentioned. The statements of support, the continued statement of support from the United States and from Congress are essential to those that are on the ground, but also sends a signal about the U.S. policy towards. And I think my hope is that you'll see similar type of resolutions and efforts happening in Europe as well. A review of sanctions, clearly a new administration's in. They're looking at both sanctions and a number of other issues potentially. And I'm certain that they will try to make a best determination to figure out how best to deploy those to have a maximum impact when necessary. So in addition to that, one other thing that I think was mentioned too by Valery is that, and of course, I think there will be a role for Congress, but also the new administration is working through multilateral bodies, as was mentioned. The Moscow mechanism was really important, but the application of it beyond where we are today, really, I think pushing on that lever, the OSCE, but also with Sweden chairing, I think is particularly important. And I know because of their interest, keen interest in what happens in Belarus, but also the UN. This administration, new administration that's in, is really stepped up its engagement, including at the Human Rights Council. And you'll also see these types of topics coming up more frequently, and human rights issues and democracy issues at the UN. So I think you hit all the right issues. Julie Fisher as well, Ambassador Fisher, who I think is excellent. But we still want to see, and we still need to see these higher level, more visible meetings and conversations, like we saw with former Deputy Secretary Steve Biegun. But we also want to see that with the new administration. And I think that will come, including face-to-face meetings as well. Valery, that you mentioned, bringing in Sviatlana, bringing in that team. And I want to commend you, especially, Valery, and also the Coordination Council, because setting up what you've set up externally under extraordinary circumstances is incredibly difficult. And you've achieved a tremendous amount of success on behalf of the Belarusian community that is both in the country and external. And I want to thank you. And Vytis as well. Your programs in support of those that have left Belarus is also essential. And I know that Congresswoman in the legislation, the BDA, and even in this resolution, there's recognition of that continued support, that assistance. And it's not only just for fiscal year 22 that we're talking about. We're talking about sort of now finding those resources on the US side to be able to support now and then into the future. So I'm going to end there. And if I can answer any questions, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to do that. I did want to just say that the Russia component of this obviously is something that needs to be watched. It wasn't lost that there's an economic lifeline that Mr. Putin has given to Mr. Lukashenko. One thing that struck me is what Valery said, which I think is true, is I've seen some informal polling on Belarusians and their attitudes toward, polling is kind of tough in this atmosphere, but their attitude towards Russians is still very positive. But when you look at threat levels, you see the threat level of Russia rising, and that's, Belarusians, as I've seen, want to have this strong relationship, but Putin's actions and everything he's done, including placing his own people in positions to manipulate, whether it's security or communications, has had a dramatic impact and has directly impacted Belarusians on the ground, including leading to both violence, arrests, imprisonment, and oppression. And so I think with that said, it's something that the US, I know, is keenly aware of. The new administration is, and as the Congresswoman said, I don't think you have a president better well versed in this region than you do President Biden and his team. And I know that they're looking at these issues carefully, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. Thank you.
Jonathan, as always, it's great to hear from you. Thank you for your thoughts and your opinions on how to move forward on this relationship between the United States and Belarus. My colleagues in the Central and East European Coalition, Eugene, is there a question to Jonathan before he has to leave us?
Yes, Michael. We would like to ask. Well, no, the attendees would like to ask a question about a post-Lukashenko plan for Belarus. Will there be a Marshall-like plan type of package for Belarus once Lukashenko is removed or leaves the country?
Yeah, I mean, first, obviously to get to the political transition is the most important. So focusing on the needs on the ground right now for civil society, free media, which was also talked about, those people who've had to leave, and then in terms of what's happening internally, especially as this situation tightens, and we're likely to see, I think, in the spring, stepped up efforts on the efforts to protest. But absolutely, I think one of the more challenging things for external partners of countries like Belarus that potentially are going to transition is how do you support these transitions. And there's a good track record in the U.S., not only the Marshall Plan that took place, but also the SEED Act, Freedom Support Act, and then you also look at the Ukraine Support Act as well. Previously, I know that the Congressman was involved in that, which is really these comprehensive plans to try to assist in a number of different areas: economic, political, energy sector, we having not had, in the U.S. not having had a great deal of resources flowing towards Belarus for obvious reasons of having an autocrat for 26 years. There's still a lot of unknown about Belarus's infrastructure, what it needs. But I can tell you right now, I know there's a number of assessments happening, and I think we would be well worth our time to think about and have in place a plan to support that transition if it happens, if and when it happens. And I think the reason is that when you have a transition, if you haven't done the planning beforehand, you and this really relies heavily on Valery and the Coordination Council, Vytis and others, to put in the work with experts. And I think GMF will be hosting an event we hope soon with some leading voices on economic reform in Belarus, to try to help look at what that plan looks like. What happens if, if energy sector decoupling happens, for example, with Russia? I'm not saying that should even be, maybe that shouldn't be the plan. Or what do you do with state-owned enterprises that are outdated in Belarus, but employ tens of thousands of people who need jobs? So these are things that have been on the table before, even with the International Monetary Fund looking at macroeconomic support. And we've gone through a very difficult year of COVID, including in Belarus, and a lot of people impacted economically. In addition to the protests, I think we have to be very careful about how we approach it. But I think it's a very good idea to be thinking about long term and not to wait until something happens and then try to plan.
As they say, Jonathan, let's be ahead of the ball instead of behind it. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. Jonathan,
I must apologize, Michael. I have to leave at this point.
We understand, Congresswoman. Thank you.
Thank you all so very, very much, and wish you all the best. Thank you for working with us.
I know that both leave, so thank you very much. Vytis, as they say in English, you save the best for last. So unfortunately, I know that we only have a few minutes left. I think that we can extend it even after the hour because this is a very interesting conversation. So Vytis, please, we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much for having me here and also for everything you do for Belarus. I think that there were a number of things told already regarding the more than 30,000 who were oppressed. I think that I need to emphasize also that there are tens of thousands of people who are forced to flee, and this is very troubling. And of course, there are numbers hundreds of those who were tortured, beaten, injured, a number of those who were unfortunately killed. So, and as Valery said, repressions do continue, and in fact, they are more targeted than before. So, and I think that I want to stress one very, very important point is that what the Western countries did, they did not recognize falsified elections. And that was a very good step to the right direction. But once we do that, there's a natural second step. And there are two options. It's either we recognize Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya as the president, and I know that most of the countries are not ready to do that, nor I feel that Sviatlana herself would be comfortable with that. So then the obvious alternative is to demand free and fair elections in Belarus. And I've heard from the team a number of times that when they are meeting high-level delegations, they are asked, what's the plan? And I am usually saying to them, mirror it back, ask the West what their plan is, because unlike Sviatlana, it's not Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya or Valery Kavaleuski who are voting at the OSCE or the UN structures. It's us, the countries like US, Lithuania, Germany. And I think, I would encourage to be at least half as determined as Belarusians are, and actually to stick to the principles of democracy and human rights. Because when I speak to the expert community and to the politicians, I hear very often that we are paralyzed by geopolitical questions or even intimidated by the Kremlin. What would be Moscow's reaction? I think that we need to have confidence in freedom and democracy, and from the speakers that I've heard, I believe that we do. So, and let's not wait and see what happens now, because Belarusian people do not have the luxury to wait. The repressions, as we spoke, do continue. And the time works also in favor of the regime. Russia currently has its own turbulence, but they will be ready for 2022. You remember that Kremlin actually announced this as a probable timing for the new elections. So they will be busy with their Duma elections. And I think the ambition should be to organize free and fair elections in 2021, May or June. Swedish presidency at the OSCE is very timely. I cannot think of a better moment. Technically, we know it's also possible, but we need to have a very strong alliance of like-minded countries. And I believe like we can build that, and because the people which were protesting in August, they had basically one demand only, is to organize free and fair elections. And though we are talking a lot about sanctions, and there's gonna be, I fear, more political prisoners, and then the next cycle of this trading the political hostages, the political prisoners, and some pragmatists will call it as if as signals of dialogue. We had that trap before. We need to be very cautious and not get into that cycle once again. So, and I think that the issue of free and fair elections is crucial. And also, if even that's announced as the ambition, I think that changes the dynamics of the process also within the country. Because currently, I think that the West is very reactive regarding establishing different institutions, and unless we call for free and fair elections, at every single meeting, high level visit, I think that the regime countries, Belarusian authorities, feel rather confident, thinking that this is their game as usual, and I think we need to change that.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you, Vytis. I think that was an excellent presentation in terms of looking at it, not necessarily just from the strict political aspect, but from a global perspective, and from a truly from all facets associated with this situation in Belarus. I know that there are a lot of questions to both Valery and to Vytis, so if I can ask my colleague Eugene to come on board and refer the questions to our panelists, please.
Sure, thank you, Michael. So the first question, I will combine two questions. And the question is, what are some impactful ways the Belarusian diaspora in the United States can be actively involved in a democratization process? And I wanted to add another question, and that goes beyond the diaspora, but regular concerned US citizens. What can they do today to help you and your teams?
If I briefly respond to this, I think that the Belarusian diaspora in the United States has done a terrific job in supporting the Belarusian cause, and not just in the United States, but all over the world. I have to recognize this, because that was unmatched by any other events in previous history, that Belarusians living abroad, and sort of you would think that they have adopted kind of new way of life, but nevertheless it has shown that they maintain this connection across the ocean, and it doesn't mean anything. If they want to help, they help. So the ways to help is to support the people who've been repressed, who've been deprived of their rights and freedoms. The other is to inform the societies they live in about the events in Belarus. Kind of they keep the Belarusian issue high on the agenda. And the third probably is to facilitate the political action by their governments to help be more courageous and more forceful and resolute in adopting the policies and implementing the policies, and staying true to and consistent with this.
If I may add, I think that we need to give a big credit to the diasporas, Belarusian diasporas all over the world. I think that some of the initiatives like Solidarity initiatives, foundations, like were largely funded by crowd-funded initiatives and supported by diaspora. And that was very timely, very helpful. Sometimes when the financial support from the like usual suspects, different foundations, like was still not in place, the like these crowd-funded initiatives by the like ordinary people like Belarusian diaspora were there. And I think that was crucial, and it played a big role. And when it comes to the question, what can we do to help the political prisoners? I think our attention, like every one of us individually, can do a lot. Believe me, I mean, I cannot tell you enough how important that is for the political prisoner to receive a postcard, a letter, you know, that changes not even their day, it sometimes changes the entire week. It's like, you know, a tiny bit of light in their like daily routine in jail. I mean, I spoke to a number of political prisoners, former political prisoners, be it Bielatsky, you know, be the opposition people, and were telling me that, you know, receiving, you know, and a simple letter like is encouraging. They do not feel alone, because this is their jobs to do, is to make them feel alone, abandoned. And thus our individual like attention, even if you are a person from, I don't know, like somewhere like remote town, like in the United States, and you know a Belarusian prisoner, you can find the addresses, you know, your like letter might be like a big thing. And of course, there are like also a number of initiatives like of this so-called God Parenthood, when like we find Lithuanian MPs at Lithuanian Parliament who are taking care of one particular prisoner. I know that it's done also in United States, in the European Parliament, and that kind of initiatives are also like very important, showing the Belarusian authorities and the regime that the like high-ranked officials do care, do follow, and if they do write a letter or like give a call to like the detention facility, I mean, the boss of that detention facility, if some, I don't know, congressperson is calling like to Belarus, it actually, like, again, is a very strong signal and a preventive measure to those who are there, like that they need to treat this political prisoner like that we're not. So there are a lot of ways to help individually and also as a community, and I strongly encourage you to do that.
I think Vytis, and to your point, Vytis, as well as Valery, it's interesting. I can give a perspective even from the Ukrainian community of what you had just said in terms of letters. We too, within our community, and not just within a Ukrainian American community or Ukrainian Canadian community, but the average American citizen sent letters to those Ukrainian political prisoners in Crimea or other parts, and it raises their spirits. It gives them hope that the world obviously has not forgotten about them. And I think that is very critical and very important. And to the role of the diasporas, I think also is very critical, because it's while yes, the Belarusian diaspora worldwide has stepped up, but it's also us as a Ukrainian or as a Lithuanian or as a Polish diaspora, because this is a region which is very central and it's central and it's core to our values to make sure that democracy is instilled. So we are all in this together. That's why we're doing this particular briefing session today, because your fight is our fight, and vice versa. So Eugene, any last questions?
There are a few more questions, Michael, and I'll start with the most important one that seems to be the questions about SWIFT. So the question would sound like, would the panel recommend a disconnection of Belarusian banks from the SWIFT network for cross-border payments, or would this cause disappropriate misery for the people of Belarus?
I'll start answering this, and I'll try to be brief. There was a survey, it was non-scientific probably, but nevertheless, about 65% of people in Belarus answering this question supported the idea of disconnecting from SWIFT, because the major argument was like, would you rather be without a credit card or go into the prison? Like, would you risk your health time and again and your life? And just for the government being able to process these credit card payments. So this is a complicated issue technically, because this is I think this is a private company that holds the SWIFT business, and it is not easy to implement such idea in practice. But nevertheless, the people in Belarus are sort of ripe for strong actions by the external actors for sanctions, be it SWIFT, be it economic sanctions, because in Belarus, since August, about 500 businesses have been closed by the government just because they were sympathetic, not even supporting the protest. They were just sympathetic to they would bring the symbols, the insignia of the protest, white, red, white ribbons or flags. So the government doesn't care about jobs. It doesn't care about the well-being. So while sometimes in the West we hear the voices against sanctions because they would damage the well-being of people, the government inside Belarus does not care about the well-being of people. So they implement internal sanctions and they punish everybody who is against them or who has the courage to speak up. So just to demonstrate that Belarusians inside Belarus, they are willing and ready to take the hit. They're willing to to face the consequences of stronger action, but be it SWIFT or be it economic sanctions, Belarusians are mostly ready for that.
Excellent. Eugene, any other questions?
Yes, there are many more. What has been a roadblock in effective action by the OSCE? What is being done to overcome this roadblock?
Well, OSCE generally, as many international organizations, it's not easy. There's a big bureaucracy, and of course the main factor in terms of pushing for real action is obviously Russia, but also the OSCE is an important institution because it can be a platform for basically all interested parties, showing and that's why everyone was looking and continues to look at the OSCE. Well, first and foremost, because they are one of the institutions in charge of the election monitoring missions, and I think given the Swedish presidency, there are still very high expectations. And I think generally this year is going to be a litmus paper for the entire organization. If Belarusian crisis is not going to be addressed, we can forget OSCE as the organization. Because as we spoke, we did not recognize the elections, so we need to make sure elections are happening. And to say that, if you hear criticism that nothing has been done, I would strongly disagree with that, because, for instance, OSCE Moscow mechanism was launched very fast and incredibly fast to investigate the crimes which were happening by the regime in Belarus. And the presentation of Professor Benedict, this investigative report, was presented, I think, in October. So for OSCE, that was unprecedentedly fast. So there are some positive trends, but of course, we need to step up to the level to make sure that this transition, peaceful transition, is actually there. And I think that without OSCE, that would be very hard to achieve.
Eugene, maybe one more question. I know our guests, it's quite late already in Central Europe, so they've taken quite a bit of our time already, so of their time. So Eugene, last question.
Okay, last question. Will the European Union or any other international organization push for a formal tribunal for the criminals in Belarus, similar to what happened with former Yugoslav crimes.
Interesting.
Yeah, I will start probably answering like very briefly, just what Vytis said about the Moscow mechanism. The recommendation was to establish the international investigative body, and this could be the mechanism to address this issue, because it would collect the information and the evidence about the crimes against humanity, human rights crimes, and that could be used later for prosecution of people who were implicated in the crimes. So there are three possible scenarios. This could be established by the United Nations. It could be established by the states who invoked the Moscow mechanism, or any other states for that matter, or it could be delegated to the NGO consortium. So there are three options at the moment. Nothing has been settled yet for now, but probably Vytis could add to this, because he's really good at this issue.
Well, so OSCE Moscow mechanism was like investigating the crimes. There's also like the report by the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, High Commissioner for Human Rights, which was presented at the UN Human Rights Council already. There's gonna be also the fact-finding mission of European Parliament. I think the presentation is like of it should be in early March. So there are a number of initiatives actually going to that direction. What is going to be the like outcome? The tribunal, like perhaps, but as Valery mentioned, as a minimum, there's gonna be an investigative like body established by the NGO like community, like human rights defenders, like prominent human rights organization. So that's a minimum. Can we like again the bar like a little bit like higher? I think yes, and given all the trends, I wouldn't exclude that possibility.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists. This has been truly an inspirational briefing session in terms of all of your ideas, all of your thoughts and opinions. We here as the Central and East European Coalition and the individual diasporas within the United States, and even with our diasporas worldwide, are with you in this particular fight, and we look to partner with you in making sure that democracy does prevail in Belarus. So look forward to continuing this coordination as much as possible, and we look forward to working with you in the new 116th Congress, with our members of Congress, as well as with the new administration as well. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you to the technical team behind the scenes at the Central and East European Coalition for helping establish and set all this up. Also, thank you to the viewing audience. Your interest in this topic is quite overwhelming, and we're very grateful for that. So stay tuned. I'm sure that we're going to be doing other briefing sessions on various range of topics, and if anything else like that, continuing on Belarus as well. So thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon, and to those in Europe, have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
One moment. Could my colleague Karin, she would like to take a screenshot for distribution.
Actually, I've already been taking several. I caught you guys in action while you were talking, so I think we're all good.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in today.
Thank you. Valery, stay safe. Vytis, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good night.
All right.